Still with me, criminal defense attorneys David Bruno and Marie Petito. Marie, I'm going to start with you again because this is, again, a domestic violence situation. And you've been on the show many times where we discussed this. We've watched this video of the interaction between police and Gabby and Brian. In your estimation, did they do anything wrong?
Yes, they did. And where I'm from, like a former assistant DA from the Bronx, both people would have been arrested because a witness told them they saw the violence and it was important enough that there was a 911 call about it. And then you pull up on the two people. One says, yes, he hit me, but it was because I hit him. Right there, you have a dual complaint situation. Both of them could have been arrested based on those statements. And I also heard that the interviewer, the investigating officer, allegedly had some sort of a bias because his girlfriend said to an interviewer on another network that he himself had threatened her when she broke up with him. So it made him sort of like a biased investigator. And there was a duty to protect her. It was foreseeable when you have two people fighting that someone's going to get hurt. But for the fact that they failed to intervene properly and follow the protocols set forth by their own police department, she might have been alive today. So yes, I believe there is a good negligence suit right there. All right, there's a lot to eat on there, a lot to sort of pick at. But David Bruno, remember, this murder didn't happen until Brian, they were separated for the night. Shortly thereafter, Brian goes back home to Florida. I think he's gone for 4 or 5 days, maybe even a week, comes back, and that's when allegedly the murder happens. So there's a long period there. I'd love to get your thoughts on this and whether this lawsuit holds water.
Sure. When looking at the $50 million claim, there's two parts to it. It's the negligence, which is the liability part, and then it's the damages. So you got to get to the damages to figure out whether there's a proximate cause. How was there a nexus between this mistake on scene and the ultimate death of Gabby? And that's going to be for the plaintiffs to prove, and the value and look, the life. I mean, can't even put a price tag on it, but the causation relationship is going to be important in this civil case. And I'm glad you led with the January report. There was an independent investigation that looked at this particular police department's responsibilities and what they did. And they did find, quote, unintentional mistakes, end quote. And one of those mistakes, ironically here, is that when Gabby admitted to the slap, she's actually admitting to be the aggressor right then and there. So one of the mistakes that the police department made was they actually should have arrested her. And now both of them could have been arrested, but when she admits to be the aggressor, that is one of the points in the report, and it's probably something that's going to come up. But it's not just the actions of the police officers right then and there, it's also the lack of training. And I think really that's where the exposure is going to be, is that these police officers, one was a very, very new police officer, is what training did they have? What training did they have about the code? What training did they have about the Domestic Violence Act and the requirement to assess the aggressor? And then lastly, the 911 caller was never interviewed. That would have been a very, very important witness to ask follow-up questions about in light of the inconsistent statements that they got from Gabby and Brian. So in the grand scheme of things, there were mistakes made. As to the value and whether or not there's causation, that's going to be something for the plaintiffs to prove.
Fair enough. And you know what's interesting? One of the ironies here is that the family's claiming that the officer at the scene was sort of partial to Brian Laundrie because of his background that mentioned by Marie. I want to listen to a little bit of the interaction between that police officer and Gabby Petito, where, at least to my ears, it sounds like he's a little partial to her. Let's take a listen.
But you tend to have a lot of anxiety and stress?
I have a lot of anxiety.
And what's his name? Is it Brian? Is he usually pretty patient with you?
Yeah, but it just makes me upset. I know that he definitely gets frustrated with me a lot because I have a lot of anxiety, and he definitely has anxiety too.
Oh, that could be a bad combo if you both have anxiety. You know, I have anxiety too, and you know, my girlfriend's really, really calm, and she has a way of taking my anxiety and bringing it down. But my ex-wife, That's why she's my ex-wife. I'm just sharing. I know it's a little personal, but to help you understand, we would feed off each other's anxiety and it would spiral. You know what I mean? And it doesn't matter how much I loved her. It may be bad for your soul.
Maria, that's incredibly interesting because he's discussing this ex-wife who I believe is the one who's making those allegations against him. And later on he says, you know what, you remind me of my daughter. I don't want to arrest you. And we know how it ends up. But your thoughts on that interaction and that claim that perhaps he was biased at the scene?
I think the interaction shows that he didn't follow protocol. I don't know what he was trying to be, if he was trying to be a therapist, but you're there to protect, and there's a duty to protect. And clearly, this was a young woman who was in distress. And I agree with David when he says, at the very least, she admitted to a crime. She admitted to being the aggressor. So she should have been investigated, and they failed on all areas. But again, I'm going to agree with David again. There has to be a nexus. How long was it between this interview and the alleged act against her that led to her demise? Can you prove a nexus? Unintentional failure to follow policy is not necessarily negligence that you can collect a money damage on unless it caused it and there's a causation there. And they're going to have a tough time proving causation, even though there was failure to act.
David, let me ask you this. Just by letting an officer on the force, knowing that this is the type of thing he's going to come across from time to time, who has that kind of domestic violence history. And again, this is according to the plaintiff's attorneys, the Petito family attorneys. We have not verified this, but if in fact that is the case, he has that kind of history, is that in and of itself negligent by the police department?
I wouldn't say in and of itself. Look, fitness for duty is an issue for all police officers. Now, as to what exactly was looked at, if they missed it, if there was something on the criminal history, maybe something that wasn't expunged or he fails to disclose. I mean, it's a very, very fact-specific question, Michael, and it will depend. And that's something that will come up in depositions and interrogatories and something explored by the plaintiffs. They will be looking for any and all mistakes on either hiring, training, or the actions of the officers.
You know, Marie, one would think that initially the state would want to keep this quiet, would want to settle this, but no, they say they're going to fight. Do you think that's a good idea?
I don't think it's a good idea, but at the end of the day, they have to fight. They can't just go around giving out money and setting all types of precedents. So they have to put up a good fight. But like David says, it's not just showing that they were negligent and that they failed to protect her. That day, they have to show because of what happened that day, she ended up being killed. The nexus has to be there, and that's an uphill battle.
Yeah, at the end of the day, at the press conference today, the family said, and we played it a little early, part of this is to bring awareness to this issue. And just by filing this, I think they're doing that. So if that is, in fact, what they really want to do, just by filing it, I think it's a good thing. Again, continue to raise awareness. All right, David, Marie, stand by. I do have to take a break.